At 3:47 local time on a Tuesday that will be completely forgotten by everyone involved except the intelligence analysts who are still talking about it, the IRGCN Air Operations Commander at Bandar Abbas made a decision that felt, to him, like genius. Dawn was still 40 minutes away. The Strait of Hormuz was a flat black mirror under a sky going purple at the edges. The air smelled like diesel and warm salt, the way it always smells at Bandar Abbas, and the SH-3 Sea King sitting on the apron had been fueled, armed with its camera system, and assigned a crew with explicit instructions. Find the American destroyer, make aggressive passes, force a course change, record the whole thing, and be home before 6 o'clock. Iranian state television had already been briefed to expect footage by morning. The propaganda victory had been written before the helicopter even left the ground. The commander had planned this for 2 weeks. He had timed it carefully. His sources in the commercial maritime network, the kind of sources that monitor AIS transponders and make educated guesses about naval positioning, had placed the USS Laboon operating in the Central Strait at reduced speed. Reduced speed meant a training evolution, or a maintenance window, or a watchkeeping rotation. Reduced speed meant the Americans were relaxed. Reduced speed at 3:47 in the dark with a helicopter approaching. Low off the water was, in the commander's estimation, exactly the kind of bold move that careers are built on in the IRGCN. He sent the crew to their aircraft. He poured himself a glass of tea. He waited for glory. 41 nautical miles away, USS Laboon was indeed at reduced speed. 4.5 knots on trail shaft, to be exact. This is where the story becomes interesting. Trail shaft is not a crisis. It is a scheduled maintenance evolution during which one of the destroyer's 2 propeller shafts is taken offline for bearing inspection. The ship is not disabled. The ship is not helpless. But at 4.5 knots with a single shaft turning, Laboon had the maneuverability of an elderly gentleman navigating a crowded farmer's market. Sharp turns were out of the question. Acceleration to emergency flank speed required approximately 4 minutes of engineering coordination before the offline shaft could be brought back online. In a threat scenario, 4 minutes is a significant window. The watch officer knew this. The engineer of the watch knew this. The commanding officer, who had been awakened by the officer of the deck as a matter of protocol rather than genuine alarm, knew this too. Everyone knew this. Nobody was particularly worried, because nobody had yet seen what was inbound from Bandar Abbas. That changed at 3:51. The SPY-1D radar array mounted on Laboon's superstructure is a phased array system that simultaneously tracks hundreds of airborne contacts, computes ballistic missile intercept solutions, and manages the ship's entire defensive envelope, all while rotating at an angular rate that the human eye cannot track. It is a piece of technology so far ahead of its time when it was introduced that the engineers who designed it had to invent new mathematical frameworks to describe what it could do. At 3:51, it detected a low-flying rotary wing contact bearing 275, range 41 nautical miles, altitude approximately 60 feet above the water's surface, speed 112 knots. The system identified the radar emission profile in 0.3 seconds. The contact was painted, classified, and entered into the tactical picture before the contact's own radar altimeter had finished its next sweep. The radar operator in the Combat Information Center glanced at the contact. He glanced at his coffee. The coffee had been sitting in the cup for roughly 2 hours and had achieved the temperature and flavor profile of warm parking lot runoff. The contact was more interesting than the coffee, but not by a wide margin. He keyed his intercom. Bridge, combat. Single rotary wing contact bearing 275, range 41 nautical miles, altitude low. IRGCN air platform. Classification, SH-3 variant. Speed 112 knots. Course 105. Assess probable approach, sir. The officer of the deck picked up the reply handset. He was 26 years old, standing his first independent deck watch in the strait, and he was moderately annoyed because the approach of a 50-year-old Iranian helicopter was going to generate a significant amount of paperwork. Not alarm. Paperwork. He acknowledged the contact with the same tone of voice typically used for reporting floating debris. Track it. Notify the CO's cabin. Get a classification on the EW suite. He put down the handset. He looked at the trail shaft situation in his engine room log. He thought briefly about the 4-minute restart window. He noted that the contact was 41 miles out and closing at approximately 1.5 miles per minute. He had about 27 minutes before this became his personal problem. He picked up the phone to the engineering spaces. "We're going to want to begin bringing the trail shaft back online. Not urgent, but begin the sequence." The engineering spaces confirmed. The sequence began. This is the part of the story that the IRGCN commander back at Bandar Abbas would never know about, and which makes the whole episode simultaneously more tense and more absurd than he realized. For approximately 11 minutes, the time required to bring the trail shaft back to operational status, the USS Laboon was operating at genuinely reduced capability. Not catastrophically reduced, not dangerously reduced in a way that would have mattered against any credible threat, but reduced. The timing of the launch from Bandar Abbas was, accidentally, slightly better than it had any right to be. The commander had guessed, from commercial shipping intelligence, that something interesting might be happening aboard the American destroyer. He had guessed correctly, for entirely the wrong reasons, based on entirely coincidental timing. In a parallel universe where the SH-3 approaching across the dark water was anything other than what it was, this might have mattered. In this universe, the SH-3 approaching across the dark water was an American-built helicopter that Iran had purchased before 1979, maintained with dwindling ingenuity, and kept operational through a combination of reverse-engineered components, cannibalizing other SH-3s that had given up the ghost, and an institutional commitment to keeping the things flying that deserves genuine respect, even as everything else about the situation does not. The aircraft now heading toward USS Laboon at 112 knots, already notably below its rated maximum speed of 144 knots, because one of the two General Electric turboshaft engines was running noticeably rough and the pilots had throttled back to compensate, was approximately 52 years old. Its APN-130 Doppler navigation radar was broadcasting its position on a frequency that U.S. electronic warfare systems had been cataloging since the mid-1970s. Its crew was talking to Bandar Abbas on a radio channel that American signals intelligence had been monitoring for the better part of 3 decades. The SH-3 was, in the language of the intelligence community, a known emitter. Every radar pulse it sent out, every radio transmission it made, every electronic whisper from its aging avionics package was a frequency that already lived in American threat libraries. Tracking it required approximately the same level of effort from the Aegis combat system as tracking a school bus would require from a traffic camera. At 0354, the SLQ-32 V3 electronic warfare system aboard Laboon began its work in earnest. The SLQ-32 is a passive electronic intelligence collection system. It does not emit, does not ping, does not announce its presence in any way. It simply listens. And at 3:54, it had quite a lot to listen to. The SH-3's APN-130 was transmitting on 9.0 GHz X-band, with a pulse repetition frequency that the system identified in approximately 4 seconds, as a textbook match for a mid-production APN-130 variant, specifically a late 1960s production run that the U.S. Navy itself had retired from service before the helicopter's current crew members were born. The system's communication suite was broadcasting on military UHF, partially encrypted, but with a voice channel running in parallel on a clear frequency. The SLQ-32 recorded everything. The Link 16 data network pushed the emission profile out to every U.S. asset in the theater within seconds. Somewhere aboard an EP-3E that happened to be conducting a routine patrol 200 miles to the north. Start house today and an hour on Alan. Electronic warfare officer sat up slightly straighter in his seat. "Sir," the electronic warfare officer aboard Laboon said, leaning toward his console with the particular body language of a man who has just received an unexpected gift. "They're running a secondary voice channel. Clear text. I've got the crew talking to approach control. The executive officer, who had made his way to the Combat Information Center upon being notified, looked up from the radar display. "What are they saying?" One of the pilots is describing a mechanical issue with the port engine. And also, the officer paused, and there was a quality to the pause that can only be described as delighted. He has significant opinions about the quality of the food at the Bandar Abbas officers' mess. Specifically, he feels the lamb has been overcooked consistently for the past 3 weeks. There was a silence in the Combat Information Center. "Log it," the executive officer said. The EW officer was already typing. He had not stopped smiling since the helicopter appeared on scope, and he would not stop smiling for the remainder of the watch. In 22 years in the naval service, this was the best evolution he had participated in that did not involve actual weapons release. The SH-3's avionics were transmitting so openly, on so many frequencies simultaneously, that he was essentially building a complete electronic fingerprint of the aircraft in real time. Not just this aircraft, this type of aircraft, with this specific maintenance profile, with these specific emission characteristics that told a story about the age and condition of individual avionics components. Every frequency anomaly in the APN-130's pulse meant a component under stress. The slight frequency drift in the communication suite told him something about the oscillator stability. The helicopter was not just approaching USS Laboon. It was delivering a graduate-level seminar on its own electronic vulnerabilities, free of charge, to every U.S. intelligence asset in range. This is worth pausing on, because it is genuinely important and genuinely funny in equal measure. The IRGCN commander at Bandar Abbas had sent this helicopter to demonstrate Iranian capability and resolve, to make a point, to force an American warship to change course and then broadcast the footage as evidence of Iranian strength. What he had actually done was provide the U.S. Navy with a detailed update to its electronic order of battle on Iranian rotary wing platforms, a current emissions profile for a specific aircraft tail number, and live audio of one of his pilots complaining about cafeteria food. The Americans were not being threatened. They were being educated, at no cost whatsoever. If the U.S. Navy billed for intelligence collection at commercial consulting rates, the IRGCN would owe approximately $4 million for the next 22 minutes of this flight. Meanwhile, the trail shaft situation resolved itself at 4:02. Both shafts online. Propulsion normal. Speed increasing to 12 knots. The vulnerability window, such as it was against an adversary whose best available threat was a helicopter that the U.S. had sold to a different Iranian government. Before the crew flying it was alive, closed quietly, without ceremony, and with no impact whatsoever on the outcome. The SH-3 reached its first visual identification range at 4:07. The crew had descended to approximately 40 feet above the water, using the surface clutter to complicate radar tracking, a technique that had been sound doctrine in 1971 and remained, in the narrow sense, tactically valid today. The helicopter made its first aggressive pass across Laboon's bow at approximately 800 yards, banking hard to give the crew's camera system a clear angle on the ship. The maneuver was executed with what the pilots probably considered professional bravado. From the Laboon's bridge, it looked like exactly what it was. A 52-year-old helicopter flown by a crew that had trained hard for this moment and deserved credit for the flying, if not for the situation they had been sent into. The officer of the deck logged the pass. He noted the tail number. He noted the altitude and speed. He noted that the helicopter's starboard navigation light was flickering in a pattern consistent with an intermittent electrical fault. He did not alter course. On the weather deck, a boatswain's mate second class was chipping paint from a stanchion with a needle gun, the kind of maintenance work that happens on destroyers at 4 in the morning, because warships do not pause their maintenance schedules for theatrical gestures from foreign air forces. The SH-3 swept past at 800 yards, the rotor wash briefly audible over the needle gun's pneumatic clatter. The boatswain's mate looked up. He watched the helicopter bank around for another pass. He could see the camera pod mounted beneath the nose. He raised one hand in a slow, deliberate wave, the kind of wave you give to a tour boat passing a marina, the kind of wave that communicates complete indifference with minimal physical effort. Then he put his head back down and continued chipping paint. The paint was not going to chip itself. The SH-3 made 4 passes over the next 18 minutes. Each pass was logged. Each pass generated additional electronic intelligence from the SLQ-32. Each pass was photographed by Laboon's own camera systems from multiple angles, providing a complete documentation of the aircraft's external configuration, its visible maintenance state, the condition of its rotor blades, and the specific camera mount installed on the nose. Intelligence that would go directly into a targeting package. Not because anyone anticipated engaging this specific helicopter, but because that is what documentation is for. The Aegis combat system tracked the aircraft continuously, maintaining a firing solution that it updated 400 times per second, even though no one had any intention of using it. The system designed to intercept ballistic missiles at the edge of the atmosphere was now providing continuous tracking on an aircraft that cruised at a speed achievable by a moderately ambitious motorboat. It was, as analogies go, roughly equivalent to using a particle accelerator to measure the speed of a shopping cart. At 4:19, the situation changed. Not for Laboon. For the helicopter. The port engine, which had been running rough since before departure and which the pilots had been nursing across 41 miles of open water, began producing a vibration that registered on the cockpit instruments as a Category 2 alert. In the SH-3's maintenance documentation that had not been fully updated since the early 1990s, because many of the original technical manuals were in English and the translation project had stalled. A Category 2 engine vibration alert meant reduced power operation and immediate consideration of precautionary landing. In the middle of the Strait of Hormuz at 4:19, there was no precautionary landing option. There was Bandar Abbas, 41 miles away, and there was the water, which was not a landing option in any category. The pilot keyed his radio. He was, at this point, still on the clear channel that the SLQ-32 had been recording for the better part of an hour. His transmission to Bandar Abbas approach control was later described by the electronic warfare officer aboard Laboon as the most information-dense single radio call I have ever been professionally delighted to receive. It contained a report of the engine alert, a request for engineering guidance, a note that fuel state was approaching the point where direct return was required, a brief summary of the passes made and footage collected, and, included at the end, with the particular exhaustion of a man who has been flying a 50-year-old helicopter over open water in the dark for 40 minutes. A renewed complaint about the lamb at the Bandar Abbas officers' mess. The response from approach control was brief. Return to base. The SH-3 broke off its final pass, climbed to 400 feet, and turned northwest toward Bandar Abbas. It did not make a dramatic exit. It did not buzz the ship one final time. It turned for home with the quiet practicality of a crew that had a marginal engine and not enough fuel to be theatrical about it. Laboon's Combat Information Center tracked it all the way to the Bandar Abbas traffic pattern, out of professional habit, not necessity. The post-incident analysis began before the helicopter had landed. The SLQ-32 data package was transmitted via Link 16 to the Fleet Intelligence Cell within minutes, flagged as high-value electronic order of battle update. The recording of the pilot's communications, including the engine alert discussion, the fuel state report, and the ongoing LAM grievance, was transcribed and tagged for the record. The visual imagery from Laboon's documentation cameras gave maintenance analysts a clear look at the camera pod configuration that had been installed on the nose, a modification that had not previously been observed on Iranian SH-3 variants, and which indicated a specific intelligence collection capability the Iranians had been quietly developing. All of this went into the database. All of this would inform the next engagement, and the one after that. The IRGCN had sent an aircraft to collect intelligence on a U.S. destroyer. The U.S. destroyer had collected substantially more intelligence on the IRGCN aircraft. This was not an accident. This was Tuesday. Now about the cost of this adventure. The SH-3 kept flying through 4 decades of improvisation and reverse-engineered components, represented perhaps $1.2 million in total airframe value on its best day. Assuming the collector was comfortable with a helicopter whose warning light panels had been partially disconnected for reasons never formally documented. The camera pod on the nose added perhaps $200,000. The mission, including fuel, crew time, and media coordination, another $50,000. The United States Navy's response involved the continuous operation of a $1.8 billion guided missile destroyer. Full Aegis activation at approximately $40,000 per operational hour. An EP-3E intelligence aircraft that retasked its collection priorities to cover the incident, and a fleet intelligence cell that spent 6 hours generating the post-incident report. Total U.S. cost of responding to 42 minutes of helicopter theater, well north of $800,000. Somewhere in the Pentagon's comptroller office, there is a spreadsheet that is not having a good year. The truly extraordinary calculation, though, is simpler than the money. The SPY-1D radar had, at any point during the approach, the technical capability to simultaneously track 127 additional airborne contacts and compute ballistic missile intercept solutions for targets at the edge of the atmosphere. It was doing none of those things. It was watching a helicopter older than most of Laboon's crew at 400 feet, with the same clinical precision it would apply to an inbound ICBM. You cannot turn down the Aegis. It does not have a "this seems beneath us" setting. It is, in the annals of technological application, roughly equivalent to deploying a symphony orchestra to play a ringtone. At 5:12, Iranian state media began receiving the footage package from Bandar Abbas. By 6 o'clock, the first broadcast had aired. The footage showed the SH-3 in flight over open water. It showed the USS Laboon from the helicopter's camera, a warship, gray and capable looking against the dark water, at a distance that the broadcast described as close approach. A narrator, speaking with the gravity of someone describing a moon landing, explained that the Islamic Republic's naval aviation forces had conducted a successful deterrence patrol in Iranian territorial waters, forcing an American destroyer to alter course in the face of Iran's resolute defense posture. The broadcast included archival footage of IRGCN pilots walking purposefully across a tarmac. It included a map graphic showing what appeared to be an American destroyer changing course under the implied presence of the approaching helicopter. A course change that had not, in fact, occurred. USS Laboon had maintained its base course throughout the entire 42-minute encounter, altered only at 04:38, when it resumed a scheduled transit track that had been temporarily delayed by the trail shaft evolution. The broadcast would characterize this course change, which was heading adjustment of 11 degrees from a maintenance delay, as a tactical retreat. The broadcast did not include footage of the boatswain's mate waving. The broadcast did not include audio of the pilot describing the engine alert on the clear voice channel. The broadcast did not include any mention of the LAM. By the time the broadcast aired, the intelligence package from Laboon's SLQ-32 had already been distributed to 11 U.S. platforms in the theater, updated the electronic order of battle database with 4 previously uncatalogued emission signatures, and been flagged for inclusion in the quarterly Iranian Naval Aviation Assessment. A review of Laboon's own camera footage identified, in the background of one frame, a previously unobserved antenna configuration on the SH-3's tail boom. The IRGCN had sent one helicopter to collect intelligence on the U.S. The U.S. had collected intelligence on the helicopter collecting intelligence. The recursion is, in its way, beautiful. The official U.S. response was a brief 3-sentence statement. Iranian helicopter. Unprofessional approach. International waters. Course maintained. Matter logged. It contained approximately the same emotional engagement one might apply to a minor parking dispute. The IRGCN commander at Bandar Abbas watched the morning broadcast with his glass of tea. The footage looked good. The narrator sounded convincing. He decided the mission had been a success. He began drafting his after-action report. The LAM situation at the officers' mess would need to be addressed separately. Aboard USS Laboon, the officer of the deck filed his incident log at 5:32. Trail shaft complete, both shafts online, transit resumed. The log entry for the helicopter took 11 minutes to write. He noted the tail number, the engine alert audible via SLQ-32 audio, and the wave by the boatswain's mate. Because the log required documentation of all crew interactions with foreign forces, however informal, and a wave is an interaction. He did not note that the encounter had been stressful, It had not been stressful. The paperwork was the only consequence that would affect his day in any meaningful way, and he had already made his peace with paperwork. The mid-watch relief arrived at 6 o'clock. Coffee was exchanged. The Strait of Hormuz looked the same as it had at 3:47. Flat water, brightening sky, the faint smear of the Iranian coast to the north. Another morning in the Gulf. Another data set for the electronic warfare analysts. Another chapter in a story that the other side will continue to tell very differently from how it actually happened. Iranian state media will run that clip for years, in retrospectives about deterrence and resolve, without ever mentioning the engine alert, the clear voice channel, or the LAM. Some stories are better told without all the facts. The Americans understand this too, which is why nobody issued a press release about the wave. Bye for now.